We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is an essay about Adichie's hopes to start a necessary conversation about the word feminist and the idea of feminism itself. She begins by talking about the misconceptions about the word feminism and the belief that feminists are women who are unhappy because they cannot find husbands. Using examples from her own life, Adichie reflects on how men are often chosen to lead even if they don't prefer it. She discusses how women are expected to behave in a certain way if they want to avoid being blamed for inviting harassment, or being thought to be people with loose morals, or aggressive and unlikable. Boys and men too are pressured to prove their masculinity, which leads them to have very fragile egos. Adichie says that when we reject feminism, we are rejecting the way gender has been used to condition and discriminate against girls for centuries. A fairer, happier world begins where everyone is accepted for themselves regardless of their gender.
Hi there, and welcome to episode 2 of the Literature for Equality podcast series, where we're using literature to talk about gender equality. I'm Diana, and this week's piece of literature is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's 2014 text entitled We Should All Be Feminists.
And hello from me, Honey. I hope you're all well out there. The best thing about this is that it is a very short book. Yay! So you can finish it in one sitting. So We Should All Be Feminists actually started out as a TED Talk by Adichie. And it really caused a stir around the world. So I personally would recommend, if you can, to listen it on audiobook because Adichie herself reads it and she really has a gorgeous voice. Now, this talk came about because so many people have the problem with the term feminist. But really, how did it get such a bad rap that a lot of boys and men shudder when they hear it? Like, she's a feminist. As though that is a bad thing. So Diana, I have a question for you. Are you a feminist?
Honestly speaking, I used to shun the word too. I really agree with Adichie when she says that feminism, for a lot of people, it's got this negative baggage, right? And Adichie says, people think of feminists like, and I quote what she wrote in her book, you hate men, you hate bras, you hate African culture, you think women should always be in charge, you don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you're always angry, you don't have a sense of humor, you don't use deodorant. So,
how did this happen?
I'm sure a lot of people agree that that's kind of like a stereotype that people have about feminists. But I realized myself that I was stereotyping feminists. And a feminist really, at the end of the day, isn't a man-hater. Definitely doesn't have to be somebody who rejects all forms of feminine behavior. I don't think of myself that way, and I'm sure you don't either, honey.
Yeah, I have to admit that when somebody asks me that question, like, honey, are you a feminist? I will always have this small pause, right? As my mind tries to figure out how I fit in the bigger picture. What does that word mean to the person asking me that question? And through the years, it has morphed into something that is more than its actual meaning. Because you also have to say what kind of group you are associating yourself with. Like these days, people get so easily triggered, right? It becomes such a loaded word. I really like the part in Adichie's speech when she says, the same way that somebody says, are you a terrorist? You are a feminist, like you are a terrorist. And I thought, how did this word become so loaded? I have to say I am a feminist because I, of course, believe in equal opportunity for women. We want to be treated with the same respect as men. And we don't want to lose out on things because of gender, right? And if you believe in all these things, then, ladies and gentlemen, you are feminists too. Okay, so why do people feel uncomfortable with the word feminist? When we talk about equality for all, some people would say, why don't you call yourself a humanist or an equalist? Adichie actually explains it really well because she says you have to name your problem. Because feminism is about justice for everyone, and when we use the word, it's just a term that points out that women have been treated unfairly for much of human history. And this is what we should have a conversation on, the word itself and what it truly means.
Pointing out that gender inequality exists doesn't mean male bashing. It's the same situation when you say Black Lives Matter. People who insist that all lives matter are ignoring the problem that needs to be addressed, there is a big problem that Black people have in much of the Western world, right? Black Lives Matter isn't about discriminating against everyone else. It's about pointing out the problems that exist for that one sector of society. For example, if we're going to launch a campaign to save the whales, we're pointing out that whales are suffering and they need extra help. It's got nothing to do with being against seals or penguins or any of the other animals. And that's why it's so important to talk about feminism, because feminism just means that we're pointing out all the ways society has put boys before girls and made it harder for girls to thrive.
Yep. And I think a lot of the times people who are very uncomfortable with this word feminist is people who do not actually see this inequality happening. And it's also kind of important to point out that wanting equality does not mean wanting to put women before men, but it's rather to erase all the stereotypes that dictate roles for people based on their genders rather than individual abilities. So in a lot of the books that we're going to talk about is stereotypes actually, right, Diana? Because like last week we were talking about Iban women, it was also about stereotyping women to a certain extent. We are privileged people. Me and you, we are privileged people because we come from a family that believes in education, no matter if you're a boy or a girl. And we live in a society right now where it's normal for women to have careers, to be mothers, but also have careers. So urbanization might have made things a little more equal, but there still exists a lot of conditioning that still unconsciously puts forward gender bias.
Yeah, I agree. We've actually come pretty far in society, but there's still a lot of room for improvement. If you compare with, for example, my parents' time, we've improved a lot, but there's still some pretty toxic beliefs we have out there. People still compliment little girls on how pretty they are or, how pretty their dresses are, but they tell boys how clever they are or how many skills they have. And that's the kind of thing that we still separate boys and girls.
That's true. I mean, it's still considered an achievement for a woman to get married. And we're not living in Jane Austen times. But it occurs to me sometimes when we have this kind of conversation is that why do we still love reading books like Jane Austen? It's because have we really come that far? Is it still a crowning achievement for a girl's life to be married and married well? Anyway, we do kind of get ahead of ourselves. So I suppose what we are trying to say is that on the flip side of teaching girls to be docile, teaching girls to be perfect, or teaching girls to be nice, is the fact that we also encourage toxic masculinity in men. So when we are teaching girls to be more submissive, people also condition their sons not to show vulnerability. Like you should not cry at the movies. Be strong, be a man, nut up, get on with it. And they're often taught to prove their worth through aggression and being powerful. So it doesn't matter, it's with status, with promotions, with money, with your fists. Like boys are encouraged to show the more aggressive side of their natures, where girls are, expected to be more obedient and polite and put their legs together and not walk in an awkward manner, that kind of stuff. So this is why I feel just as how we educate our girls, it's also important to think about how we educate our boys. Because one thing kind of like influences the other. It adds to the other.
Yeah. There's one key point that Adichie makes in her book, is that she points out that men and boys are as equally as negatively affected when gender is used to define roles. Like boys, for example, are taught to stay away from things that are considered girly. Many boys think that the only way to relate to each other is to play pranks on each other or to tease each other, right? We say things like nice guys finish last and girls prefer bad boys. And that's kind of like the kind of thing that just reinforces the stereotypes that boys can and should behave badly. And that's what girls like. The reality is we've made life so hard for men and women by teaching them to adhere to these strict gender roles. Have a listen to this excerpt from Adichie's speech.
We do a great disservice to boys in how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity is a hard, small cage, and we put boys inside of this cage. We teach boys to be afraid of fear, of weakness, of vulnerability. We teach them to mask their true selves because they have to be, in Nigerian speak, a hard man. In secondary school, a boy and girl go out, both of them teenagers with meager pocket money. Yet the boy is expected to pay the bills, always, to prove his masculinity. And we wonder why boys are more likely to steal money from their parents. What if both boys and girls were raised not to link masculinity and money? What if their attitude was not the boy has to pay, but rather whoever has more money should pay? Of course, because of their historical advantage, it is mostly men who will have more today. But if we start raising our children differently, then in 50 years, in 100 years, boys will no longer have the pressure of proving their masculinity by material means.
You know, how were you raised? I mean, you have a brother, right, Diana? How were you raised? Were you and your brother raised differently?
My brother is the only boy. I have two little sisters, so he has three sisters. I don't know how to get into that, but definitely I feel in many ways like my mother hangs on my brother's success much more than she talks about, her other children's achievements. And my maternal grandmother, she used to look after my brother and I when we were little, but she would never live at our house because, you're not supposed to live with your daughter. You have to live with your son. Even though her son was in a tiny little apartment and he didn't have enough space for her because he was the boy. She had to live in his house.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it's come a long way since then. I see a lot of differences, but when you're talking about the older generation, yeah, it makes a lot of difference, I think.
My situation is kind of similar to yours because I have one brother and three sisters. So he's also the only boy. And on the flip side, I kind of felt being the only boy for him as well. Yes, he was a lot more spoiled when he was younger, but then again, he's a lot older than me. But however, as he grew older, I think he also put a lot more pressure on himself because he's the only boy. So it's also that, that it kind of goes both ways, right? Because he gave up his dream of being a graphic designer in order to, support his family and got a corporate job. So he did give up a lot of things because he felt as the only boy, he also needed to be reliable. I think both genders have things, have things that are thrust upon them. Okay, which is why when we're talking about gender equality, if we actually fight to be more equal when it comes to things like this, we will all be better off. And I think this is what Adichie is really trying to push forward. Because when we stop using gender stereotypes to decide what people can and can't do, we can all just behave in the way that suits our own unique personalities. I know this is a very utopian way of looking at society. Say, okay, if you're a girl and if you rather be a camera woman, if you rather be, somebody who goes out there that does be a National Geographic photographer, why not? If you rather play more boyish games, more video games, why not? You don't always have to conform to the fact that you have to wear pretty dresses all the time. And if you're a boy and you're good at cooking, if you're better at baking than your sister, why should you be ashamed of that? And I think today, I find that a lot of my friends also kind of raise their children like this. I always see postings of my friends on Instagram. Their boys have their sons actually enjoy cooking them a meal. They have their girls on football teams. I think it's a little bit, people are starting to see that they should just see what their kids are interested in and encourage them, regardless of gender.
Yeah. This is the end of part 1. For discussion topics and some fun activities, go to rngdr.com/LFE. This is part 2 of the We Should All Be Feminists book discussion. In part 1, we discussed why people are afraid of the word feminism and touched on toxic masculinity. Part 2 will dive into reclaiming back the word feminist and includes our own nerdy takeaways from reading this book. Listen on. I think it's simply not true that if you're a feminist, you reject all forms of femininity. You know, if you're a girl, you can be a feminist and you still like girly fashion, you see like dolls and makeup and all that. It just means you get to choose what you like. And, you know, your choices in life shouldn't be defined by your gender. We kind of tend to associate women's things with being weaker, you being lesser, being like, you know, less desirable, to the point that some girls feel they have to adopt more masculine traits in order to compete. And it's kind of like a thing that in society, we look down on traits that are associated with being female. You know, like girls tend to be more introverted and shy, or the way girls tend to spend a lot more time needing social interaction and affirmation. And even the preference for like cute and cuddly things. Like we've normalized masculine traits so much that anything associated with women and girls is considered undesirable. Why can't boys wear pink if they like that color? Why can't boys sit with their sisters and play Barbies if they want to? And why is it that boys get teased if they get to a certain age and they still like Pokemon, or if they have these kind of arty kind of interests? I don't think that's nice.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, like you reject all forms of femininity, right? You keep thinking of, you know, women walking around with hairy armpits and, you know, in combat boots, like something like Tank Girl. Well, I absolutely used to love, you know, getting dressed up, going out to clubs and things like that. But I still kind of also like doing like hiking and doing rough stuff. And it's interesting when you say things like that about how, okay, when you are a woman in a man's world, right? Like say women in high corporate environments, there is a time when they had to be more manly than men, to be extra aggressive. It's almost like they kind of like embody that toxic masculinity. And this, I think, was especially back, I guess, like maybe in the 90s or 2000s, you know, like those times, right? When women that are in high positions of power, people always say that, oh, yeah, she's more man than a man. If you do that, you're actually rejecting the fact that you can serve the company better as a woman, if you know what I mean. There are traits that women have that are incredibly useful in a corporation. They are better at negotiating. They are better at compromising. They are better at meticulous work in some ways. But if you reject all that and take the aggressive view of men, right? And not listen to people's opinions and things like that. And I know we're stereotyping men here, but you know, this is what people always kind of look at men in like big corporate environment, right? You know, that whole Wall Street demeanor. So I feel that when you do that, you kind of lose out on all the feminine traits that are actually useful for a corporation. I always find that that is a shame.
You're completely right. And that's why people like, you know, people say that boys who want to get in touch with their inner self, like their feelings and stuff, like letting your feelings out is considered a girly kind of thing. Only women get all touchy-feely and stuff like that. And only women sort of get in touch with their inner needs and understand, you know, what other people around them need. That kind of thing is not considered to be something that is positive. But we're starting to realize just how bad it is for men who are forced to always have a stiff upper lip. Always, you know, like don't cry no matter how bad situations get. You know, never show your emotions like that. And I read something the other day, this meme that said, you know, we've come to this point in society where we actually made it seem like women are the ones who are weak because they're the emotional ones, and completely ignoring that anger is an emotion. And that's the main emotion, the only emotion that we let boys feel.
You know, that's the thing about Adichie's book. It is incredibly short, but it is so impactful. It really makes you think about a lot of things. The part where she goes into a restaurant and the waiter just completely assumes that the man that she's with is going to be paying the bill. And the fact that the guy that she was with did not even think about it. Instead of saying that, why are you not greeting my companion for the night? He just accepts it. As you can hear at this excerpt from Adichie, is how we all can actually do better.
Gender matters everywhere in the world, and I would like today to ask that we begin to dream about and plan for a different world, a fairer world, a world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. And this is how to start. We must raise our daughters differently. We must also raise our sons differently. Culture does not make people, people make culture. If it is true that the full humanity of women is not our culture, then we can and must make it our culture. The definition of feminist in the dictionary is a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. More of us should reclaim that word. The best feminist I know is my brother Kenny, who is also a kind, good-looking, and very masculine young man. My own definition of a feminist is a man or woman who says, yes, there's a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better. All of us, women and men, must do better.
And folks, feminists aren't just girls, by the way. Some pretty well-known men have spoken up to say they are feminists too. Men have to speak up and take part in the conversation. Harry Styles, for instance, is a self-proclaimed feminist who has supported the ongoing UN Women's Campaign #HeForShe since 2014. Mark Ruffalo, who is the Hawk, has spoken up about women's rights and about sexism. He sees his women co-stars experience, for a very long time. And even now, right, actors get paid more than actresses. They probably still do. It's getting better, but it is still true. And Coldplay's Chris Martin has worked with the Global Citizen Group to highlight equal rights for girls and women around the world. And of course, US President Barack Obama famously published an essay in Glamour magazine in 2016 about being a feminist.
To quote President Obama from the article, it's easy to absorb all kinds of messages from society about masculinity and come to believe that there's a right way and a wrong way to be a man. But as I got older, I realized that my ideas about being a tough guy or cool guy just weren't me. They were a manifestation of my youth and insecurity. Life became a lot easier when I simply started being myself. I think that's one of the things that all of us can benefit from learning more about gender equality. When all of us are released from these gender roles, we're all better off. And in the end, it's about justice. Don't we all just want to live in a just, fair world where everyone's allowed to be themselves and not be discriminated against just because they're born a certain gender? And Adichie says, for centuries, the world divided human beings into two groups and then proceeded to exclude and oppress one group. It's only fair to that the solution to the problem acknowledge that.
Amen, sister. Okay, so now we are at the part of the show where Diana and I talk a little bit about our takeaways from the book. In fact, we hope that after you listen to this episode, you yourself might want to, have a book discussion with your friends, So we encourage you to use our episode as a springboard for your own discussions about the word feminism. How did you feel reading or listening to We Should All Be Feminists?
Well, Adichie has put the question of feminism into this simple, concise text and made it really accessible for everyone. And she makes some great points, I feel, about why we should do more than just speak up for girls. We need to speak up for what gender stereotypes are doing to boys too.
Yeah, I definitely would categorize this as a thought-provoking read because books like this are always good to just center yourself and your own worldview. We get busy and we forget sometimes and we fall back on social conditioning. It made me think of excuses parents give when I was growing up. Oh, he's a boy. You can be rough and dirty and play outside. Oh, you're a girl. You should be all proper and not get sweaty. Honestly, this comes with go and chop some onions in the kitchen. This has happened to me when I was small. Or how we are trained to take plates to the back and our father and brothers just keep on watching cartoons and news on the television. You have raised a boy and a girl, Diana. How do you do it?
It's actually quite hard to raise children without any notion of gender. That's the kind of thing that people are trying to do more and more nowadays, right? But, I don't believe, for example, that girls must play with girl toys and, boys must wear clothes that make it crystal clear they're a boy. But we don't actually live in a vacuum, and children pick up on all these cues from society. So, for example, like when my son was a baby, I got told off by this older lady, this complete stranger, because I let my baby boy wear red, because apparently that's a girl color.
I thought it was a good luck color.
I have no idea. I got told off. And even though I tried to interest her in Lego sets, my daughter knew from a very young age that Barbies and princess dolls were the girl toys. And she insisted on getting them. I mean, I sort of feel like we try to make girls not girly, and that's not a really good thing either. We shouldn't do that either. I've seen some other parents that are so worried that their boys will be influenced by girly behavior. They won't even let their sons in the room when they're putting the makeup on. I'm like, that's a bit extreme. There's so much worry people have about how they're raising their children right. I feel like this is something that society has to address. We need to speak up about gender roles and pay attention to these kind of things, because otherwise these lazy, outdated stereotypes just keep getting perpetuated. We all need to start questioning these cultural norms that dictate that girls should always be quiet and respectful, and boys should be indulged and allowed to ignore household chores, because that's not the role. Shouldn't we teach boys to tidy their own rooms, how to load the washing machine, how to cook? Because these are all skills that they need to have in order to become successful adults too, right? And Adichie says in her book, I've never thought it made much sense to leave such a crucial thing, the ability to nourish oneself, in the hands of others. Doesn't that make sense? Like, you want your child to be able to feed himself, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. My son's pretty good at cooking, and he's impressed a few of his friends because he's had dinner parties hosted by himself.
Oh, that's so nice. But see, I agree with you, because on the flip side, you should also teach your girls to change tires. Imagine you get a flat tire in a dodgy neighborhood. I would like to know how to change my tires snap quick without sitting around waiting for somebody to save me. How to check your engine oil. In some parts of the world, how to hunt, how to shoot a gun. These are important skills, depending on where you are, right? Yeah. I know when you were talking about how you used to dress your son, right? When I was small, my mother liked short hair. She never let me keep long hair because she just thinks it's too much hassle. So until I was maybe 9 years old, everybody just thought I was a boy. And when they found out I was a girl, they were kind of horrified. They told my mother, you have to put a ribbon in her hair, or else people think she's a boy. And I was like, even at that age, I was going, why? So my mother compromised and brought me mother care dresses. So occasionally, instead of wearing my holy t-shirt and shorts, which is literally what I wore all the time, she would bring me to functions and force me to wear mother care dresses. So that, okay, it's a girl. Okay. Why should everyone read this book, Diana? It's very easy. It is short, it is interesting, and it would really make you think about how certain things are done in this world. So that next time you hear things like, hey, go and take your brother's plate to the back, you can question your mother. Why can't my brother take his own plate to the back? I think it's better now. It's just that when I was growing up in the 80s, yes, there was still a girl's providence to actually be in the kitchen. But I learned to be a good cook, so I'm fine. Now that you've listened to this discussion, tell us what you think of the word feminism. What do you think of it before you listen to this show? What do you think it means? Are you afraid of using the term to describe yourself? And this goes for both boys and girls, yeah? Because as you know very well, boys can be feminists too. We like to hear what you think, and you can win yourself some sweet, sweet prizes. So you can drop us a TikTok video entitled, I'm a feminist and this is what I like to do. You can tell us in an IG slideshow about the ways you see gender inequality around you. You can even start a Twitter thread about what a feminist is not. Or what about posting to Facebook about your favorite quotes from We Should All Be Feminists? You can do whatever you want to show us that this is a book that you have thought about. So, go crazy, everyone.
You can check out our website at rngdr.com/LFE to read the rules and regulations for the Literature for Equality Project contest. And this contest actually runs from the 17th of October all the way to the 16th of January 2022. You can feel free to respond in your own way to any of the episodes in the Literature for Equality Project.
Yeah, I think we can probably give some ideas and some suggestions as well, if you're not entirely sure what we mean by entering the competition. And if you want to respond to all 8 of the episodes in this series, please, we encourage you. The contest is open to any students aged between 12 to 20 currently studying in Malaysia. There are 2 categories, young adult, which is 12 to 16, and upper secondary, which is 17 to 20.
Don't forget to include the hashtag Literature for Equality contest and tag us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Then head over to the contest page on rngdr.com/LFE to submit your entry. And if you'd like to get into some further reading on the topic, why not check out another of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's books, Dear Ijiawele, A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. It's basically a letter she wrote in response to her friend's request for suggestions of how she could raise her daughter to be a feminist.
Another excellent book to check out is Feminism is for Everybody, Passionate Politics by Bell Hooks, which encourages us to demand alternatives to patriarchal, racist, and homophobic culture and to imagine a different future.
This is the second episode of the Literature for Equality project, which is brought to you by the Two Book Nerds Talking podcast, made possible with support from the Canada Fund for Local Initiatives. Do check out the other 7 episodes in the series. To find the episodes and more information on the project, including full contest details, check out our website at rngdr.com/LFE.
And you can also keep up to date on our social media. We are at Two Book Nerds Talking on Facebook, TBNT Books on Instagram, and TBNT Pod on Twitter. This has been the Two Book Nerds Talking podcast with myself, Hani Ahmad, and my excellent co-host, Diana Yong. Have a great week ahead, and thanks so much for tuning in.